محمود علي يا مزهر الأجوائد.
يلا أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا مولانا حبيب الله العالمين أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. Inshallah you're all doing well. Inshallah you're all keeping healthy. Welcome back to the Nahjal Balagha book club. I believe this is the 6th session with this group, so I'm very grateful, alhamdulillah, to have reached here. I want to get into the discussion. I want to get into the saying. I want to get into the topic which we have chosen, which is spirituality and moral decision making in Nahj al-Balagha. But I want to say something which happened really interesting, like literally a few moments ago, which maybe we can, I don't know, draw lessons from. So I get a call literally just before the session starting. Now, in general, if you get a call which you don't recognize the number, people don't pick up. I don't. And more so if you're about to go into a meeting or a discussion, it's the wrong time to take a phone call. But still, I just like, okay, let me just take it. I don't know. So I took the call. The call was somebody who I worked a case about a year ago, maybe 8 months ago, a case of a group of Syrian families who were in Beirut in Lebanon, and they were not able to come to the UK, but they had been accepted by the UK government to live in England, in the UK. And they came under the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, a special scheme for people who are either refugees or with vulnerabilities. And there are these 49 Syrian families who had positive decisions, but their tickets got cancelled and they couldn't go. And this was just after the explosion in Beirut. So they were in a bit of a tough situation. And the rights in general are quite hard in Beirut and Lebanon, let alone for people who don't have papers, okay? So I got contacted at the time by an NGO and they knew me through working in Greece. And they asked me, you know, what can we do? So I made a team. I was part of a team at that time of lawyers in the UK, lawyers in Lebanon, humanitarian workers to try and appeal this decision. So we contacted the Home Office and for a long period of time, not only alhamdulillah were we successful in this case, but they actually changed the policy where they reopened the scheme. So everyone whose tickets were cancelled were now able to arrive in the UK. So it was actually a really amazing to be part of. And so that case was done. I didn't meet these people. I was working remotely and all of these things. I never met them. And then, alhamdulillah, from February, they started arriving into the UK. So it's like, okay, alhamdulillah, this is working. This is a great result. It's like 100, nearly 200 people who are part of this scheme. But they're all scattered around the UK. Okay, so some of them are like, oh, we'd love to meet. I'm like, I'd love to meet you. But they're like, oh, I'm in Scotland. I'm in, I don't know, Manchester, whatever. One of the main people in that family, I won't mention his name, but one of the main people, he called me just now to say, Abbas, I'm in Sheffield and let's meet. So before he had said this to me and I was like, Hajj, you know, we can't travel as a pandemic. But then I realized that this Muharram, inshallah, I'll be lecturing in the north. If any of you, by the way, are in Manchester or Bradford or Blackburn or Bolton, I'll be lecturing in a few centers in your area. So inshallah, it'll be nice to link up. So I was like, actually, Hajj, I'm going to be close to you. He's like, where? Or, you know, Ayn. And I said, no, في Manchester. Goes, أنا قريب بس you know, 5 دقيقة, I will come and see you. So I was like, oh my goodness. So he says, okay, Abbas, I will call you and I will meet you. And I would love to introduce you to my family and my wife and all these things. And I'm like, okay, inshallah. So when I put the phone on, I was feeling so grateful that like I would never have expected to be part of this kind of case, this kind of high profile case. And now I'm going to meet him and it'll be an amazing experience. And I just wanted to share some of that joy with all of you because it was just a few moments ago. I want to tie this to our topic, but I'm not sure how to, except to say that inshallah, may all of us find gratitude in the ways that Allah uses us. And may Allah increase the ways in which we are able to be useful to this qawm, inshallah. Anyway, okay, to Nahj al-Balagha, to the book club and to our topic of moral decision making. We have set ourselves to read what is probably one of my favorite sections of Nahj al-Balagha, which is saying 289. We said this last week, and the sequence, if you recall, was that last week we were looking at the story of Abu Dhar al-Ghafari, rahmatullahu alayh. And alayhi speaks in Sermon 130, and he speaks about how Abu Dhar was an example of a true mu'min, as we recall. And we said, okay, we like that Abu Dhar is like, but how can I also be like this too? How can I develop certain qualities of how the Imam wants me to be? And there is a beautiful saying. It's actually longer than a saying. It's longer than many sermons, but it's in the saying section, because that's where it is being classified by Sharif Radi. It may well be that we don't know how it was said or what circumstances, so it's put in the hadith section. It's hard to tell, but it's in there. And I sent that to all of you on the WhatsApp group, and I asked if you had to think about it, because it is one of the most beautiful parts of Nahjal Balagha, in which the Imam records a friend he once has, and he goes through how he was and how he behaved. And in the tone of the Imam, those of you who read this saying, you can tell the Imam has genuine, muhabba, like love for this person. At the same time, that person is not named. So it's not even clear who he's speaking about. Now, some narrations say maybe it's Ammar. Other narrations say maybe it's the Prophet himself, the Holy Prophet. Maybe some blessings be upon him. The majority of narrations signify this was Uthman bin Maz'un, one of his companions, a companion who was so great that some people believe the Imam named, his children after this name of Uthman. But that's not clear that this is who he's speaking about, because he never names who this person is. But he goes through how he was, which I'm going to go through right now. And in doing so, he describes up to 10 or 11 different qualities of what a successful person looks like. In the context of our book club, I've mentioned this because we are slowly, inshallah, throughout this series of this book club, trying to know how I can become a better moral decision maker. When it comes to right and wrong, how do I choose right? And looking at examples like Abu Dhar, or like the Akhun Fillah mentioned in this saying, we gain some inspiration. And inshallah, by gaining inspiration, we can start to look for these qualities in ourselves. And if we see the opposite in us, at least we know what to change and we know where we need to improve. So inshallah, we'll do that. So if you have your copies of Nahjal Balagha open with you, open to that saying, 7289. Or if you are following online, the link was sent on the WhatsApp group, so you can check it out there. Or it's on... depending on the copy you have, it might be a different page, but it begins with Kana fi Ramadan akhun fillah. In the past, I had a brother in faith. Does anyone have any issues actually getting the excerpt? Has anyone got any problems in having it in front of them if they want it, or they couldn't find it, or was it all okay? If you have any issues, please do mention so that I can, before we start, assist you in finding the section. In fact, Muhammad, if you're there, and I don't know, watching the football, can you copy and paste from the WhatsApp group the saying into the chat, just in case someone doesn't got it? Is that okay for you to do, inshallah? So if you click that link, it's saying 289. So you have to scroll down a little bit, and there's the whole version there, mashallah. For those of you in your homes, read a salawat, inshallah, for Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It was Ali who wrote it. Okay, Muhammad doesn't get a salawat anymore. Now Ali gets a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajum. Okay. Thank you, dear brothers, for your great teamwork. Let's dive into this saying. I'll go through the whole thing, and then I'll stop and ask you what your reflections were. The saying begins, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Kana li fima mada akhun fillah. The Imam says, in the past, I had a brother in faith. وَكَانَ يَعْظِمُهُ فِي عَيْنِي صِغَرُ الدُّنْيَا فِي عَيْنِهِ. And he was prestigious in my eyes, because this dunya was small in his eyes. وَكَانَ خَارِجًا مِنْ سُلْطَانِ بَطْنِهِ. And the needs of his stomach, which he had, did not sway him or influence him. فَلَا يَشْتَهِي مَا لَا يَجِدُ وَلَا يَكْثُرْ إِذَا وَجَدَ. He did not long for something which he didn't get, and neither did he get a thing which he did not ask for more once he had it. كَانَ أَكْثَرُ الدَّهْرِ سَامِتًا. Most of the time he was silent. فَإِنَّ قَالَ. And if he did speak, بَذُّ الْقَائِلِينَ وَنَقَعَ غَلِيلُ السَّائِلِينَ. If he did speak, he would silence the other speakers with his speech, and he would quench the thirst of those who ask questions in his speech. وَكَانَ ضَعِيفًا مُسْتَضْعَفًا. And he was weak, he was feeble. فَإِنْ جَعَ الْجِدُّ. But when he was fighting, فَهُوَ لَيْثُ الْغَابِ وَسِلُّ الْوَادِ. He was a lion in the forest and a serpent in the valley. لا يُدْلِي حُجَّةٍ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ قَاضِيَ. He would not put forward an argument until he was sure it was decisive. وَكَانَ لَا يَلُومُ أَحَدًا عَلَى مَا يَجِدُ الْعُذْرَ فِي مِثْلِهِ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ اعْتِذَارَهُ. And he will not reproach anyone or speak to anyone in a matter which was excusable, حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ, until he had heard اعْتِذَارَهُ, heard their excuse for what they had done. وَكَانَ لَا يَشْكُو وَجَعًا إِلَّا عِنْدَ بُرْعِهِ. And he would not speak of any ailment which he himself had until it had disappeared first. وَكَانَ يَقُولُ مَا يَفْعَلْ وَلَا يَقُولُ مَا لَا يَفْعَلْ. He will just speak of what he was going to do, and he would not say what he would not do. وَكَانَ إِذَا غُلِبَ عَلَى الْكَلَامِ. If he could be exceeded in speaking, لَمْ يُغْلَبْ عَلَى السُّكُوتِ. He could not be excelled in his silence. وَكَانَ عَلَى مَا يَسْمَعُ أَحْرَسًا مِنْهُ عَلَى أَنْ يَتَكَلَّمْ. He was more eager to listen than to speak. وَكَانَ إِذَا بَدَهُمْ أَمْرًان. And if two things came in front of him, if he confronted two things, يَنْظُرُ أَيَّهُمَا أَقْرَبُ إِلَى الْحَوَىٰ. He would see which one is closer to what my heart is longing for, or what my heart is desiring. فَيُخَالِفُهُ. And he would oppose that thing. And the Imam ends by saying, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِهَذِهِ الْخَلَائِقِ فَالْزَمُوهَا وَتَنَافَسُوا فِيهَا. These qualities are incumbent upon you, they are lazim upon you, and you should acquire them and try to excel each other in getting them. فَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَوِيعُهَا. And if you can't get them, فَعْلَمْ. Just know this. أن أخذ القليل خير من ترك الكثير. It's better to acquire a part than to give up the whole. And that's how he ends. And that's the end of this saying. If this is the first time you're hearing it, I know exactly how you feel, because the impact of the Imam's words and the tone of it are so evident. If you have already read it, maybe in reading it, you came across some ideas which were particularly beautiful, or some reflections which you found, it's so amazing the way the Imam mentions this quality. It's enough to say this: if this was a real person, okay, because some ulama believe maybe the reason why we don't know and the reason why Imam doesn't name them is because each of us can insert ourselves into what he's saying and see how far am I from this template of this brother in faith. The Imam says, I once had this brother in faith, you know, he was like this, and like I'm thinking, oh, am I like that? How far away from that am I? And of course, there are different sections and different themes that I'd love to unpack with you. But before I do, I would like to ask you, for those of you who read this saying or who are listening it to now, what stuck out to you? Were there any points which you thought were particularly interesting, or how do you think the Imam said this? And what is your general reflections when you hear this saying? Has anyone got any reactions to it, just listening to it?
Yeah, to be honest, the first time I actually read it, when he said at the start, in the past had a brother of faith, I actually like felt like more emotional and sorry for the Imam, just because he's talking about it as if like from what my initial thoughts were like, he doesn't have a lot now. So this one in the past was really an important one because there's very few of them there. So that's the first thing which I noticed, which I wouldn't have expected to experience once I read this, but I did. I sort of felt like just a little bit touched in that way, just like he's talking about this past brother in faith and we know what he's been through and all of that kind of thing. So that was where my mind went at the start.
That is a beautiful reflection. And you're right. There are some areas in Nahjal Balagha where the Imam is like this, where he'll say, Aina Malik, Aina Ammar, where are they? Where are my friends? Because he looks around, he doesn't see them anymore. And there are other instances where he does name and speak in a very sad way of those. Ya Abu Dharr, remember last week, you know, when he's speaking about Abu Dharr leaving in front of him, there is sadness. And here I agree with you. There is sadness here too. That is an important point to mention, the mentality of the Imam. Brother Salman, I see your mic is unmuted. Were you going to add anything?
Two ideas came out, the idea of zuhud and the idea of wisdom. Zuhud, because he mentioned that the world is humble in his view, which sort of brings to your mind of how being detached, not having a lot of hubb dunya for the world. And the idea of wisdom, because he mentions nobody would exceed him in silence. And there's a hadith from Imam Rida, which is very famous, says silence is one of the gates to wisdom, and it's known that useful silence, as the ulama call it, which have certain categories of what you can do to enact this useful silence, leads to wisdom.
Yes, I'm just writing this down for my own personal notes. And yeah, as the Imam says, min abwab al-Jannah, one of them is silence. That's definitely true. Ahsan, Brother Salman. Any other points of anyone else of your reflections on this? As Muhammad has written in the chat that these qualities are incumbent upon you. Yeah, that is actually a very deep ending. The Imam is saying, wherever this person was, I expect this from you. Like, I want this from you, the reader, the listener. These are upon you now. Like, if you thought that you were off the hook in being my Shi'i, no, this is what is expected of you, and this is what I long for. You get that tone. And if we link the sadness from the first brother, from Brother Ali Farshuri, to the point of Brother Muhammad Ismail, the Imam wants us to be like this, and he is sad when we are not, for example. Inshallah, the points that Brother Salman mentioned we'll go through in the section, but definitely we have got the tone in the way that I see it as well, alhamdulillah, in that I agree with you. Are there any other comments about this saying while listening to it, or anything which stands out, or your just general, like how you feel listening to the Imam speak like this? Okay, let's say it says, I just feel sad. Habibi, I do as well. Ali has says, this reminds me of another saying, which from the Imam, I believe how maintaining secrets is one of the keys to becoming a mu'min. Ah, that is true. Very subtle and powerful. Ali, Nayari, I think that is in the saying section, but if you in your own time can find out which one, I would love it, because it'd be very useful for me to have for another session. So if you can, my dear brother, I'd love to find a reference, but there is a saying of the Imam saying that secrets, holding secrets is one of the keys of Iman or belief. Yeah, I wish I knew the actual reference. In any case, I agree with you, brothers. Are there any other points anyone wants to add before I dive into the actual words? Okay. كان لي فيما مضى أخ في الله. In the past, I had a brother in faith. He wants to speak on each other. Sister Kauthar, what you've written, I want to speak about, inshallah. I want to speak about that theme when we come to it. So please hold on your ideas for that when I come to that line, definitely. In the past, I had a brother in faith. Now, as we know, the name has not been mentioned. Maybe it was Uthman bin Mas'ud, but we don't know. We don't know. Even if the hadith indicates, it's not been named in any of the copies of this hadith in multiple chains that we have. وَكَانَ يُعْظِمُهُ, he had greatness في عيني, in the eyes of me, the Imam has said, صِغْرُ الدُّنْيَا في عيني, because this dunya was small, it was humble in his eyes. Okay, this idea of the dunya, of the world, for this person, for the ideal mu'min that we're discussing, they don't value themselves by this world. They value themselves based on something else. So what that means is when they see this dunya, they are not attracted to it in the same way someone else might be. Now, the dunya itself is not necessarily a thing that will take us away from this world. This dunya is an alam, it's a world in which we're in. And ba'ad hayat dunya, we're going to be in barzakh and in another life and another life. It's part of a journey which exists. It's not itself najasat, but attraction to it is a great problem. So one of the points one of the scholars mentions is whenever the Imam speaks about dunya, and by the way, as Ayatollah Mutahari correctly says, Shaykh Mutahari, criticizing this dunya might be one of the most important themes in Nahjal Balagha, this world with its attractions. And the Imam is speaking in the end of his life, in which he has seen around him people just not follow the religion because they were just attracted by love of this world. He sees it around him. Okay, but the dunya itself is not essentially problematic. The problem is attraction to it. So what you'd find is dunya lakum, your dunya has deceived you, or don't come to me dunya. So it's about me and you and our relation to dunya. It's not the world itself. Just like here, fi aynihi, the dunya was small in his eyes, meaning that if you and I have a certain way of looking at this world as small, we can try to avoid many of the traps other people face. And the beginning point, the first thing the Imam notes of this believer, think of all of the amazing qualities which come up. The first one is the dunya was small in his eyes. He didn't value himself by this dunya. He didn't look at himself as being belonging to this world. He looked at himself as belonging to somewhere else. We have another narration of the Imam saying, Man karramat alayhi nafsahu, hanat alayhi shahwat. The one who values themselves, the one who sees themselves as having karam, as having status, they will regard their desires as low, or they will regard attachment to this world as low, meaning they'll not want to be attracted because they've already found their value, their karam, somewhere else. So for the Imam, you need to look for your own value outside of this world which you have been born in. But he continues about what this looks like. What are the manifestations of this lack of attachment to dunya? وَكَانَ خَارِجًا مِنْ سُلْطَانِ بَطْنِهِ. Batn, his stomach, did not have sultana, did not have control, or sultan is like a king. It didn't have kingship over him or influence over him. And by stomach we mean the things he would consume around him. They did not sway him. Whether it's consuming food or it's consuming attention or fame or anything which the ego can become satiated by. None of these things swayed him. He was far away from the language of this worldly attractions. In another narration of the Imam, a lot of people ask, and I think I mentioned this last week, why do I not cry sometimes? Whether it's in dua or in prayer or in majlis, for example, sometimes I just don't have those tears. And sometimes, by the way, it's good to have these gaps of not being able to cry for the Imam or cry for Allah. I can mention why it's important to have those feelings. But not being able to at all is definitely a problem. Your heart should be humble before Allah when you actually go to Him. So the Imam says the reason why some people's eyes are dry is because their heart has become hard. And the reason why their heart has become hard is because they have committed excess sins. And the reason why they have done excess sins is because they have consumed haram, sultani batnihi, either in their income, meaning they have halal rizq, from which they are earning, or that very thing they're consuming is actually forbidden for us to have, whether it's something we look at or something we consume. And the reason why they do this, why they consume haram, is because they have forgotten to be fearful of death. They've forgotten the life to come. And the reason why they forgot death, the Imam says, is because they have had lengthy desires, excessive desires, which they followed. And the reason why they follow those excessive desires is because of their attachment to this dunya. And he says the dunya is the heart of the very problem, one of which is a manifestation of the eyes which do not cry. But as we mentioned, loads of things. What does it go back down to? Being attached to this world. So not being swayed by it, not being satiated by it, not being attached, not being too attached to it is definitely one of the keys to achieving a level of enlightenment the Imam expects from Akhun Fillah, his true brother in faith. And when they have this, and when you have this, you have a certain contentment. فَلَا يَشْتَوِي مَا لَا يَجِدُ وَلَا يَكْثُرُ إِذَا وَجَدَ. That which you didn't get, you don't long for it anymore. Something passes you by, it passes you by. And even if you get a thing, la yakthur, you don't want more of that thing because it's the one who gave it to you with correct measure. Allah is the one who has his al-mizan, his scales, on which he knows what everyone needs, whether it's a reward, whether it's a ni'mah, whether it's a test, whatever comes your way. We believe that the one who gave it to me measured it according to what I can take. La was'a, meaning if I do have a test, it will not be more than I can bear because the one giving it to me knows me. The mu'min is the one who, when they get something, they don't want more and more and more, the way this dunya pulls you down into an endless ocean. And neither when they get something do they ask for more. They are content with what they have. They're content. They don't need any more. This main theme which the Imam starts with is an idea of not being attached to this dunya. There's a comment, you found hadith in Ghura al-Hikam. That's fine. It would have the chain in there. So thank you so much, Brother Muhammad. Okay, love of dunya. Now, let me pause here for a second and ask you. I said earlier that this dunya is not inherently bad. It's attachment to this dunya, okay? That's true, but I'd like to ask all of you, why do you think people become attached to this world in a way that they would forget their afterlife? What is it about this dunya which is so attractive or alluring? It would be so easy for us to say what we're saying as words, but in action, people are attached to this world. So where they live and they will do jobs and they'll be in relationships and go to countries where there is no Allah and they're attached in that way. Why do people become attached like this? And what are ways in which we can detach ourselves from these attachments? Anyone got any ideas about why human beings are attached to this dunya? Any theories of why we're in this situation and how to get out of it? I did it again. I asked 5 questions in one go. In general, why does the Imam stress on dunya being a bad thing to attach oneself to? What do we think? So, Salman, I see your mic. Let me see 1 second, just read out the comment quickly.
No problem.
Looking for an inner peace they can't find. Okay, a good start by Adi Sayyid. They can't find inner peace. Salman, what can we add to this, brother?
I'm literally stating the obvious since nobody's speaking.
It's just, I think, Stu, it depends on the type of attachment is. So it could be fleeting pleasures. So if it was to do with gaming or drugs or etc., or it could be that love of a certain thing. So for prestige maybe, or appearance. If it goes back to wealth, if I have wealth, I can look powerful, etc., etc. I can make myself look good. I have a good reputation, etc., etc.
Good. So those are more qualities like wealth, power, prestige. You feel good when you have these things. Whereas
Yeah,
the Imam
that's my
says
point.
no, like you shouldn't want them, right?
And you mentioned how to overcome them. I think it goes back to a reflection.
Mhm.
One thing that's very much emphasized in our faith is reflection, reflection, reflection. Because
Definitely.
if it's done properly, it can overcome that, but it has to be done consistently so you don't fall back. And I forget the exact Quranic verse, but it also supports this. It's in Surah Al-Mulk where it says, had they pondered or listened? It gives two options: pondering, listened, or listening or pondering.
Yep. Yeah. And like you said, regularly as well. So if I'm passing muraqaba and muhasaba, these are things which are to be done in a sequence and in a system. Even though we have narration saying that 1 moment or 1 hour of contemplation is better than maybe 70 units or 1,000 units of prayer, that's true in the way that it's intended, but also like sometime in your day. How many scholars have recommended journaling or contemplation and reflecting? And like you mentioned, going back to your day and looking at where did I do something for Allah, where did I do something for dunya, because these two things can't exist together. Our Holy Prophet has said, and I think I mentioned this narration not long ago, that love for dunya and love for Allah cannot exist in the same heart. They are so conflicting things. One wants you to be in this world, one wants you to escape this world and to go فَقِرُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ, flee to Allah. They want different things and they drive you in different places. So you're right, contemplating helps to go through who I really am and what I'm really attached to. Ahsan, dear brother Salman, thank you for that point. If that point helped encourage anyone else with any ideas you have, please do share. But I'm reading my brother Ali's comment. A possible reason, so what we're asking is why are we so attached to this dunya, and what are ways to escape it in addition to reflection, as our dear brother mentioned. Ali Nayari has said, a possible reason is relying on satisfaction, which is quickly and easily achievable, instead of exploring long-term satisfaction, which is more difficult at first and involves foregoing the aforementioned short-term pleasures. A culture of instant gratification, which we are in. And the pleasure of Allah, a part of it, we will achieve, inshallah, at the time of liqa Allah, meeting of Allah, which is not in this dunya, unless a person has reached a certain maqam. It's in akhirah. You taste the majority of those pleasures in the next life. This world is either manazir, it is haywan, it is a testing ground, or it's a thing which evolves. It's not the whole thing. The whole thing comes later. But that's a long-term pleasure. And I'm much rather wanting a short-term pleasure. There are many experiments on this for children and for animals, but whether or not they would take one treat now or 10 treats later, for example. I can't remember the name of the experiment. If any of you know it, you can mention it. So yeah, we live in a culture of instant gratification, and delaying pleasure, even though we know through experience is more worth it when you wait for something which you really want. We don't want to wait. We want it now. And that voice becomes really loud when the pleasures are all around you, you know? Why do I need to fast? Why, if I can just literally eat right now or not abstain right now? Why do I need to? It's hard to talk that voice out unless you have genuine reflection. And I think you've added to Brother Salman's point about constant dhikr. It helps you maintain a good state of spirituality, just like prayer. Exactly. So they're reminding you of the right way. Like if we wish to prevent disease, we must strive to maintain a good diet and be active to avoid poor health. Exactly. It's like a disease. And what do we say in 2 sessions ago? Our Holy Prophet is tabibun dawarun bitibbih. He's a roaming physician looking for diseases and going and solving them. And that's what religion does. It helps you to be healed when you are not healed. Kaniza mentioned it's the marshmallow experiment. Is that what it is, Sister Kaniz? The thing about like you'd rather have one now than like 5 later or something? I don't remember precisely what it is, but I do know that you know, one person's marshmallows, another person's waffles, and I guess we all have different, different. 1 hour or 2 later, I get you. So that's the principle demonstrated quite well. Sister Fatima has written, not sure if I can say this, but I think we all want to be God in a way. We seek His qualities that in reality cannot be attained, but only given by Allah, like power and wealth, for example. Interesting. So, what we're trying to do, what the ego wants to do, is to be the malik of the self. It wants to control the self. It wants to shape the entire body for the sake of the desires. In the same way, we want to shape our body to be limbs moving for the sake of God. In fact, if there is a battle for the human being, they are both claiming authority over it. And accepting the ubudiyah of Allah, the worship of Allah, means that I believe that I am submitting myself to God. I'm becoming literally an abd of Allah. But what if I become an abd to my desires, where I cannot say no to them anymore? Or an abd to the pleasure of this dunya, where I can't resist it? If that's the case, I have chosen as a God, as a deity, a thing other than Allah. Now you've mentioned, Fatima, you've chosen yourself as the very idol you are worshipping, which is even more problematic. But I think accurate people, unfortunately, they do this, unfortunately. And that might be what the Imam is talking against. Brother Ali has mentioned, Ahsan, just like brother saying from Imam Ali, I believe, relief of mind illness is a Quranic recitation, and as an example. Okay, so you mentioned that, mentioned in the Quran as well. Ahsan. You have to be patient in the rewards of detaching from the dunya. The process takes time and won't give instant results. Good, Ali, it's true. It's not an immediate win. It's a process. It's a process. The person is not just saying no to their button once. They're saying no to this sultan, to the idea that my stomach has authority over me. That's a daily struggle. And sometimes it's a silent struggle, and sometimes it's a struggle that others around you will not necessarily recognize, but you will do. And as Brother Salman said, if you have a constant reflection, you can see your progress and how you're doing to judge whether or not I'm more or less attracted to dunya and attached to it as I was before. And like we said, we need dunya. It's not itself a bad thing. It's just a place for testing, a place which has its own desires, some of which we are allowed to exhibit. The problem is choosing them as ilah over us instead of Allah, like Sister Fatima said. And that is what the Imam is very praising this person for not falling into that trap. Ahsan, all of you. Before I move on, with any other points about this idea of being attached to dunya, anyone wanted to add?
One more thing that people might find interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Ali Raza Panahian, if I pronounced his name correctly, mentioned this like experiment once. And I was actually looking at things and being engaged with them. If you don't focus on them all the time, and they did this with like children, and they put a big cake in front of them, and they said, okay, if you don't look at this cake, if you don't eat this cake,
yeah,
you'll be able to get something much greater, or you can, or wherever it was. So the children who actually looked at the cake, they ended up eating it. Whereas the other children who actually looked away, like completely, like not completely, but they just turned away. They didn't look at it. And they didn't focus on that ilah, that object of their desire. They were much more easier. They could much more easily disengage from it. So, say if you have chocolate, if you're addicted to chocolate, like instead of like keeping it somewhat obvious or having lots of it in your house so you always see it, disengage it. You can apply that principle to different things. So I don't know if you love cars or something, don't follow Instagram accounts, all these things, etc., etc.
Or anything. I think delayed gratification is like a very human thing, where like different cultures, they know this. Otherwise, they would implode in their own. They would not be able to have any long-term plans or sacrifices. For example, there would be no government or state if we're giving up our freedom. If we don't want to give up our freedom and just do everything we want, like the philosopher Hobbes says, there'd be life would be nasty, brutish, and short and chaotic. There would be no need to have any government or society or project, because I all want to do what I want to do. But at some point, people would rather give up one freedom for another, give up their freedom of, for example, choice for freedom of survival, if it's true that in the masses we can survive. So everyone's doing this. It's not just Islam which speaks about this, but Islam speaks about it in the context of this dunya, where it's not about choosing between things in this world. I don't want to be attached to the world. It's just a means for me. So that is a good point, Brother Salman. There was a really good comment. Well, there's a lot of good comments that I saw. So Muhammad explained that it was about the children who wanted the longer term, bounty. They would have a better life. Okay, inshallah, we are of that quality. It's this comment by Sister Kauthar. Is it just me, or the more you read about and explore this, the more appealing it becomes? Imagine making a small worldly sacrifice and then gaining eternal blessing in the akhirah. And you're right, like we've literally been given the answer of how to succeed in the world, and we're still on the wrong path. That's the point. It's like it's in front of us, and the Imam is repeating it so much. And the more you think about it, like you said, Sister Kauthar, it becomes more and more evident that this is the way of the wise, and the way of the ancient ones, and the way of the experienced ones, and the way of the enlightened ones is this. They didn't want this dunya. They were ready to give up something temporary for something eternal. And like I mentioned earlier, it's because of where they attained their value from. They didn't see their value as being of this dunya. What does Abu Abdullah say? You've been created for the value of Jannah. So don't sell your soul for any price less than the value of Jannah. When I see myself like that, then my goodness, isn't this life a more tolerable thing to deal with? Especially when I don't get things that I really, really want. Wallah yajadu, even if I really want something, it's like, it's okay, let it go, because your creator has something much better for you to come. And like you said, Sister Kauthar, when you think about it, isn't that a sacrifice worth making, a transaction worth giving into? Isn't that a deal worth striking with the creator, who we're giving little to and attaining a lot from? Alhamdulillah, great points by everyone. Sayyid Hashim, Assalamu alaikum, Habibi. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Wa alaikum salam. Yeah, it's actually a bit of a reflection, maybe also.
Please.
You can comment on it more maybe at the end or now. So the two verses which add to this point are كلا بل تحبون العاجلة وتذرون الآخرة. No, but you, O mankind, love the immediate and neglect the hereafter. And then the other verses, إن هؤلاء يحبون العاجلة ويذرون وراءهم يوما ثقيلا. And it basically says the same thing. You mentioned a point earlier before you asked this question, and you said something on the line of, I forgot the hadith you mentioned, but it was if you attained your value, or you see the value in the hereafter, then whatever value here will feel really small, or something of that sort. I think you mentioned.
I mentioned to one from Imam Hussein saying that the value of yourself is Jannah. So don't sell your soul for anything less than the price of Jannah.
Oh yeah. So like if you realize that, and you realize that the value is there that you will truly have, then things here become much easier. I think the brothers and the sisters mentioned also dhikr and constant reflection. And if you live in this world, it's very hard to say that, okay, I'm going to be around this chocolate for 24/7, like basically 24/7, and say, I'll keep away. And I think the way the prayers are divided, obviously, throughout the day, are a great way to constantly remind yourself of where you are and what is actually more valuable. So the point of reflection, which maybe I'll mention, actually, you know what, I'll mention now, but maybe if we have time, we can reflect upon it later. واستعينوا بالصبر والصلاة وإنها لكبيرة إلا على الخاشعين. And seek help through patience and prayer, and indeed it is difficult except for those humbly submissive to Allah. So that's one thing which I feel like is a clear differentiator. If you want to know truly you are connected to this dunya, or you are connected to the hereafter. It's the same thing with the stories we hear throughout, for example, the Ghazwat Khaybar, when they used to say the Sahaba used to like work all day with the Prophet, like digging and everything, and then whenever they get tired, the Prophet will go and pray, because this will be his rest, and here where he will find like he will get the energy again back. And you feel like, oh, but that's the opposite. For example, in my case, like
exactly.
Now I'm gonna stand up. It's gonna be tiring.
Yeah.
So this is just a reflection. Maybe we can reflect upon it. Yeah.
It's a good point. It's a good point. The source of his peace was prayer, whereas sometimes the source of peace is knowing that we've just prayed. And for the Imam, no, it's the actual prayer itself. You're so right. You're so right. And it's that peace which is in this line that وَلَا يَكْثُرُ إِذَا وَجَدَ. They don't want more once they've got something. Like they're so content, the true believers. And I think like you mentioned, dear brother, it does require, to attain, to decide that and to want that patience and to decide that you are going to live in this kind of lifestyle. It is a choice, I think. I think it's a choice, because you can live a whole, one of the Imams, Ali, says this world is filled with people who are asleep. Like most people, they don't choose this. They just go along with the traditional, the conventional way, and they miss something very valuable, and that's that feeling of inner peace. Actually, Ali, you started that point earlier of having inner peace, and now you've commented again. Perhaps there needs to be a complete willingness to submit exactly to the fact that we are not in control. Allah's will pervades all and everything's provided by Him, and to take a leap of faith, meaning trusting that once we choose to act 100% to our knowledge, pleases Him, we get satisfaction and a stronger link with Allah. Exactly, because we have no expectation of what God will do with me. I give myself to you entirely, Ya Allah. Now, if you give me or don't give me, I'm not going to love you any more or less based on what you do to me. This is unconditional with you, Ya Allah. And this is part of being an abd. An abd submits himself to the decision making of the Malik. And if we are in Allah's mulk, His kingdom, his we respect His sovereignty, I'm not going to preempt what is good for me. Allah knows what's good for me. Allah knows. And like the brother mentioned, prayer will be a way to understand that and get that feeling. But it's God who knows, substance and risk can also be spiritual, and practicing conscious action and active reflection will surely help us with taqwa and radha, where the state of always being satisfied and being happy. Happiness is the goal for all things. And again, we only get that state of radha, of true atmi'nan and peace and contentment, if you go through the process, you go through the steps. It doesn't just come like that. It takes consistency, like Salman said. It takes dhikr, and dhikr not just once. It takes adhkar, continuous dhikr, as mentioned in the Quran. So that is so important. In fact, we have certain narrations Salman is saying which are extremely useful. And one of your friends implements different adhkar in their life and at different times. You're right. There is a science to this. There's a science. And by science, I mean certain prayers are useful for certain environments, and there's a reason and purpose for them if they're done in the right way. That's why the Imam says, for this certain issue, read this dua. For this problem, read this verse of Quran. There is some wisdom in there for the one who understands. We pray we can understand. There's a comment or a question by Sister Fatima. If we are content, what would the substance of our dua be? Since we wouldn't want anything beyond what we're already given. Well, maybe, Sister Fatima, would be Rabbi zidni ilman, Rabbi zidni ma'rifatik. Allah give me ilm, Allah give me ma'rifah. These two things we cannot get enough of. We can be peaceful and have itminan with what Allah has given me, but not with what I want from Allah. I will always want Him. And that journey to Allah is continuous. And that's why, even if you have nothing in this world and you are living this life, you still feel brokenhearted. You still feel sad. That feeling doesn't go away. What happens is that feeling then you align with Allah, that He is the healer of the broken heart. He is the one who sees me in my suffering. And the suffering is wanting Him. That's why it's beautiful. I'm no longer living for people around me or voices or labels or any of these things. I just want God. And even the Imams would cry and weep for Allah as if they had lost their children, because they were wishing to have more and more ma'rifah of God, because that is one thing which doesn't end. One of my teachers, I think Sheikh Shumari mentioned this point, that even in Jannah, our ma'rifah increases, and that is eternal. We were saying about, we actually asked him, like, which things are eternal, which things are sarmad, are azali, and the answer was the human potential. Our potential does not stop, it keeps increasing, and we can always ask for more of that. I hope in that there was some answers to you, Sister Fatima, although trusting you, you will always bring up new and more relevant questions. But in this point about wanting more, you can never have enough ma'rifah of Allah. And the more you have it, the more you want it. That's what muhabba is. You don't become satiated or stopped. You want more. Inshallah, we can try for more. Okay, I really want to move on to a few other sections, but you are all making some beautiful points. So if you have any, please do unmute now or write in the chat and we can continue. And if not, I'll go to the next part, which is on speech. So the Imam then continues and says, وَكَانَ أَكْثَرٌ دَحْرِ سَامِتًا. Most of the time, أكثر دحري, most of the time, he doesn't speak, like he's silent. فإن قال, if he does speak, بَضُّ الْقَائِلِينَ, he silences the other speakers. وَنَقَى غَلِيلَ السَّائِلِينَ, and those who ask questions, ask su'al, they become their thirst becomes quenched by the little that he says. Most of the time, he doesn't speak most of the time, just a little bit. The same thing comes up later in their speech when the Imam says, وَكَانَ لَا يَلُومُ أَحَدًا. He does not reproach anyone عَلَى مَا يَجِدُ عَلَى عُذْرٍ فِي مِثْلِهِ حَتَّى يَسْمُعَ اعْتِذَارًا. He will not speak harshly to someone until he has first heard their excuse. And by harsh, you mean in a manner which you would not expect or which would be excusable. He won't be like that. He won't be harsh. He won't be accusative. He will listen first. Same thing comes up again. وَكَانَ إِذَا غُلِبَ عَلَى الْكَلَامِ. If someone can speak better than him, if there is someone more articulate or someone who speaks better than that person, I apologize for saying him, by the way, because it applies to everyone. لَمْ يَغْلَبْ عَلَى السُّكُوتِ. They cannot be excelled in their silence. People will be much better than them in speaking. It's possible if they are. But no one has greater silence than this person. So going back to the original theme about most of the time they just don't speak, they are silent. If I was to mention the true benefits of silence, it would be more wise to just stop speaking and be silent. I won't go into them in too much detail. But the Imam likes it when you withhold your tongue, you listen more than you speak, and not you just listen. You want to listen more than you speak. وَكَانَ عَلَى مَا يَسْمَعُ أَحْرَسًا مِنْهُ عَلَى أَن يَتَكَلَّمَ. They want to be silent more than they want to speak. They want to listen more than they want to speak. This might be a reason why some of you do not want to speak in these things, because you'd much rather listen. Alhamdulillah. But I would like to listen as well. So why, that was a why question. Let me ask a different question. Why do you think, okay, I did ask a why question. Why is silence so beautiful, really? What is so beautiful about silence, where you don't speak, you don't argue, you don't even debate and laugh, you just take time to not speak and interact at all? What is the beauty of silence, do we think? I know it's a perfect excuse to actually be silent, but please don't, because I want to hear your views, inshallah. Salman mentioned, I have a friend who has an issue with silence. What would you recommend to control the tongue? Interesting. Now, there is a balance to silence where sometimes you should be silent, sometimes you shouldn't be silent. This is really important. But I want to first go for the benefit of silence itself, like aini, like the thing itself, and then we'll go through when you shouldn't be silent and how to control your silence. Muhammad has mentioned exposure to different ideas. No, it's not Muhammad, that's Sayyid. Muhammad's mentioned, there's a hadith, silence is the garden of thoughts. Yes. Is it Bustan al-Faqr? Or is it, I don't remember the exact line, but yes. The more silent you are, the more you can contemplate and think and reflect. Whatever input you have of ideas and how much knowledge you consume, you have a chance now to process through your knowledge, filter it, put it in its correct maqam, its correct place, do adl to the ideas you've been given, give it an appropriate place, and draw your own conclusions. But you can only do that if you stop speaking and start thinking. You can't think on the spot while it's coming out. Although it's true that extroverted people are much better at coming up with what they want to say while they're speaking, and introverted people generally would rather remain silent and then speak at the end of a conversation to then, after they've gathered their thoughts, maybe you can think which one you are. But the Imam does stress stopping and thinking being linked to silence. Sayyid has mentioned exposure to different ideas and have time to have thoughts about these ideas and see which one fits best. I love this point. Because the more perspectives you come across, the more ways of looking at an issue you're going to be confronted with. And it's not clear what is the best one. So giving yourself that time to rank perspectives, or at least to see which perspective is closer to haqq, to truth. And that takes time because it's not always clear. What does the Imam say? Know the truth and then you will know its people. So I have to know what is haqq first, and then I can go through which of these people is closer to it. So actually, this is an answer to Salman's question. How can someone control their tongue? By listening to people with different views and being exposed to more knowledge. Because then they'd be silent more in not knowing what haqq is. And you have to think of which of these voices is true, and then you speak on that thing. But to think you're always right and you don't need other perspectives, that is to not understand that the more you learn, the more you have to contemplate. So actually say, I think you've answered Samad's point quite well, but we can go through it again and later. Ali's mentioned the dua, Allahumma inni as'aluka khayra ma tas'al, for wanting more. That's the previous point. On silence, Sister Kaniz has added that I find silence can make a person more understanding. It helps you listen more. I agree. It makes you more reasonable. And actually, have you noticed that when you have an issue, you want to like speak to someone and you want advice, isn't it amazing when someone is willing to just listen and like hear you? Because those people, when they respond to you, they've actually had time to understand what you're coming from. They ask probing questions, they want to know about you, they're interested in what you're saying, especially if you want advice. Why would we go to advice to people who cannot understand us? What advice can they give? So you're right, the more silent you are, the better a listener you become. And the more active listening you do, the better advisor you can be in what you then choose to say. But again, the beautiful point, Sister Kaniz, is you choose to say little. That's what the Imam is saying. And most time they didn't speak, they would just listen. And then when they did speak, the one who asked questions, their thirst was quenched because the person had genuinely considered what is the answer to this particular point. Sister Kauthar has quite wisely added that you can absorb what's happening around you. So when you actually talk, your words have more value, your opinions are more educated. Exactly. We are like this. When we sense things, whether it's through our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste, our touch, our minds need to register those sensory perceptions into ideas. And there's a gap between sense and idea in philosophy. Maybe in psychology too, actually, if any of you have studied this, where from between you learn something, well, you touch something to when you understand its sensation, there is a small gap. If that's true for touch, what about ideas? That when you hear something, you need time to process it. You should give yourself that time to truly understand the theory. And to add to this, sometimes you know something, you have a certain understanding, you hear the same thing again, either in a different way or a different voice or a different time in your life, and that same thing means something completely different. It could be a verse of Quran, which means something different to you now, or an example of the Ahl al-Bayt and their suffering, or a saying from Nahjal Balagha. And now it means something radically different because I've had time to let the idea mellow and marinate inside me. There's one hadith Brother Ali has mentioned, which is the best way to practice control of your nafs is controlling your stomach and that which you consume. That can include eyes, you're right. And that can help control the tongue. That's right. Stopping, speaking, taking silence. Wasn't Lady Maryam sallallahu alayha's a fast of her tongue when her child was born? And Nabi Isa, it can be a way of fasting. And with any type of fasting, it gives you benefit after. In this case, it would be better speech. Salman has added it's something in general. Oh, but the person you're speaking with. If the person is generally talkative, like you mentioned, Salman, that maybe it might be their personality or something to do with the way they've been brought up, or even a health issue like you mentioned. We're speaking generally. We're not speaking if this is linked to a health condition, which would have other considerations too. But we can go for that later if there's time, my dear brother. Ali has said, agrees with Sister Kauthar, as we all tend to do quite often, because the more that you facilitate assimilating ideas, the more clarity and proactivity you can have. You're right. You're no longer reacting. You're no longer reactionary. You are thinking, contemplating, and then acting. In fact, there's a hadith of the Holy Prophet where someone came and was praising a man to the Prophet of, look at how amazing his actions are. And they're going for like all his actions. And the Prophet says, وَكَيْفَ أَعْقِلُ الرَّجُلُ? And how is the reason of this man? Meaning, for the Prophet, it's not about what you do, it's why you do it. More than that, we are not here just to react to news. We are here to understand what's happening around us and then be proactive in our projects, in going a step further to stop suffering or issues happening to us. That takes our reason, and that takes silence, where you observe, you learn, you understand what's happening around you, and then you pounce like a lion. Imam mentions later, like a fierce warrior on the path of truth. But that only comes with that first period of silence. There's a psychological term Sister Ali has mentioned, which is the pause. By practicing the pause and silence in stressful situations, you can control how you behave and react more positively to certain situations, rather than reacting to a negative way immediately without thinking first. This is a way. The pause is linked to exposure therapy as well, where you allow yourself to experience stressful things and you just forbear it. You just got to get through it. And at the end of it, because you've had the sensation of forbearing it and you've strengthened your skin to survive after you've had this onslaught of stress or uncertainty or unsettledness, you can now deal with it again in a different way, and you can start to build ways of dealing with it. But you're right, you have to submit yourself to it. And so being silent when someone is speaking something wrong in front of you is hard. But what's better is when they're finished, answering them in the way to stop them saying that thing again. And you only speak when your words are more beautiful than silence, as dear brother Wasi has mentioned. And that then you can give real advice, true advice. Imagine being alive in time of the Imam. The Imam is saying, Saluni, Saluni, ask me before you lose me. قبل أن تفقدوني. And you can bring your questions to the Imam. How much would you value having Imam Ali Islam around you to answer your questions in this way? His words are more beautiful than silence, but only because the Imam practiced this. The Imam was silent. He would listen and then he would speak. Let me go through some more comments. Our dear brother Salman has mentioned the hadith, surely someone's silence can be the most eloquent reply. Ahsan by Imam Ali alayhi salam. You're right. Sometimes silence is the most eloquent thing you can say to someone. Silence is the best reply to a fool. Another hadith we have from the Imam. I think is attributed to the Imam, where you don't need to argue with someone. You don't need to make these different points. Sometimes your silence indicates your disapproval with something. Sometimes your silence indicates your approval with something too. So you've got to be careful and judge the situation. But speaking beautifully, especially if you're arguing or doing debates or in these polemics or responding to challenges to your aqidah, the Quran mentions the best way is dua ila rabbika fi sabilih bil maw'adati al hasana wal hikmah. With wisdom and with good and wise communication. That's the way the Quran wants us to speak. It's not just speaking for the sake of speaking. Mu'adatul hasana, positive argumentation. Those words are beautiful, and oftentimes we need to make arguments to defend ourselves and to stand for the oppressed. We should not be silent all the time. We're only speaking about why silence itself is a beautiful phenomenon. I think I got for the end of the comments. I think you guys have grasped this concept much better than most people have. The benefits of silence. It is wisdom. It is a gap to stop, to pause, and also, like all of you have mentioned, silence itself is beautiful, but it's beautiful for the sake of something else as well. Something in jamilun bidhatihi wa bighayrihi. It's beautiful for its own essence and something separate to it. And the thing separate to it is speech. Your speech becomes more beautiful. You now make the right stances against oppression. Like Brother Ali is saying, if someone swearing at the Imam, he ignored them. It's saying he was mentioning someone else when questioned by his followers. Like he didn't want to put someone down or make someone feel bad. I gave a speech to a school recently in an assembly, and I mentioned the story of the Holy Prophet and the lady who threw rubbish. Is a classic story of the lady who was throwing rubbish at the Prophet, and he went to see her, to visit her when she was not well. He was silent through the suffering which she gave. And while I'm giving that assembly in front of like 200 kids, which was, by the way, a very uncomfortable situation for me to be in, like 200 of anyone, but 200 kids. Actually, 200 adults is fine. 200 kids is really hard. One girl put her hand up and says, what was the emotional state of the Prophet at the time when he was being silent? What a question. She was like, the age group was 9 to 12. That's the exact point. Like, and the answer should have been, I don't know if I said what I said at the time, but the answer should have been the Prophet, by being patient in that situation, and the Imam being patient in your example, Ali, and me and you being patient and we face abuse towards us, makes us more beautiful, and it makes our speech more beautiful. And Allah wants both. He wants us to improve and grow, and He wants our speech to be useful and have value. And I think Imam Ali Islam believes one of the secrets to practicing this is the ratio of speech to silence. For the Imam, silence is more beautiful in terms of compared to the ratio with speech. And of course, the exceptions we've mentioned already, one of which is oppression. Don't let anyone tell you I'm not going to a protest because we should be silent. No. I mean, in general, no. Only if that's true for a specific example. In general, we have to speak up against oppression. It's our farth, our duty. Silence is no longer beautiful when the foot is on the neck of our brothers and sisters on the ground in front of us, when they cannot breathe. In that case, silence becomes offensive. Silence becomes cruel to them. And the Imam teaches us both. Because then he says that the believer, وَكَانَ ضَعِيفًا مُسْتَضْعَفًا, the actual believer, he's mentioning about they're weak, they're feeble, mustad'afin, the people who are oppressed. They are not these brave people shouting around, mouthing off, being loud. That's not who they are. Like, they don't want to impress anyone. However, فَإِنْ جَاءَ الْجِدُّ, but when they are fighting, yani when the time has come to speak, وَلَيْثٌ غَابٌ, they're a lion in the forest. وَسِلٌ word, they are like a serpent in the valley, finding its way through the right crevices to the right enemy. Anywhere you go, there is danger. This is when the believer is standing for truth, is acting on this religion, and has found those moments where the deen requires us to stand up. When we do stand up, we are unshakable. Nothing moves us. The Imam says your feet should be like mountains planted in the ground, that even if the wind was to come, it wouldn't move you. That is what is expected of us. That certainty of our hearts, where if I know what the truth is, nothing is moving me from it. My anger is God's anger. My happiness is God's happiness. To become that level is not to show off in front of people. You are weak in front of people. Mustadaf, da'if. It's not about people. It's about Allah. And when Allah gives you strength, there is no chink in that armor. There's none. The Imam himself, he returns back when fighting would be for the anger of his own self, when he spat on the face. It's intolerable for him. But when he returns only with the anger of Allah in his heart. Have you noticed the hadith of Khaybar, when the Imam rips the gate of Khaybar, how he's the same Imam who later on was too weak to break bread in his home? So clearly Imam alayhi salam is not strong because he is working out all the time, or because he is, throwing rocks around like they used to do at that time. No, the Imam is strong. The Imam has genuine strength, which impacts his entire existence, his wujud, because when he prays, it's as if he has passed out and died from his love for Allah. Because when he's done with that prayer, when the enemy approaches him, there is no fear in the heart of Ali bin Abi Talib, not for a second. So when he lifts the door of Khaybar, some ahadith indicate his feet were barely touching the ground when he lifted it. So this is about strength. Where did he get the strength from to pivot his arm in the right angle to lift this door, which 10 people couldn't lift after him? Because it's not about his body anymore. It's about his maqam, his spiritual status. And that he gets from Allah. And the Imam says, you are expected to build yourself up to be like my lion on the battlefield, my serpent in the valley, like you fight for me. In many places, he refers to his followers as his brothers. Just like here, وَقَانَ لِي فِيمَا مَضَنَ أَخٌ فِي اللَّهِ. He's my brother in faith. The Imam takes you as his own because he sees the same strength in you, which he obtains in himself, because the source is the same. It's Allah Azza wa Jal. And we can all do this today. We can all do this today, inshallah. Any comments on this part of the sermon, of how the believer can be weak in one environment but strong in the other? Or any comments on that point? Okay, so he would not speak about anyone unless he had heard the excuse, like we mentioned. This goes back to speaking and the excuse. One point I really want to stress on this line: وَكَانَ لَا يَشْكُو وَجَعًا إِلَّا عِنْدَ بُرْئِهِ. He won't speak, or he or she will not speak about something which they're suffering from, an ailment, until it's left them. So they will not stress on it now. It's only when it leaves them that they are prepared to speak about it. Last question to all of you. We can go on about excelling in secrets. These things are wajib on you. Oh, and taking a part is better than leaving the whole. That can be the conclusion. But I want to ask you about this point, and then the last main point. It's better to speak about an ailment after it's disappeared. What if I speak about my ailment while I have it? Why would I want to be someone who will withhold the suffering I'm going through, not share it, and only tell you what I went through after I went through it? What could be the possible wisdom in hiding my suffering from people? Now, we're not saying when you need help for your survival or for your well-being, then you seek help. But in general, why is Imam saying don't tell each other of what you're going through until you've gone through it? What could be the reason for this, do we think? Because, by the way, sometimes sharing does help. It does help to share what you're going through. It helps you get through it sometimes. It's very important. In those times, maybe that's the right thing to do. But other times when you're dealing with something alone and it's a test for you, for some reason, don't share it while you're going through it. Instead, some hadith say, don't say loudly when you are ill. I don't get it. Why? Why is the Imam saying the true believer does not speak of their ailment until it has passed? I really want to get your views on this. Go with a counter question. Oh my goodness. Okay, fine. Why would I need to tell people about my ailments when it's only Allah who can truly help me through it? what is the point of telling people? Okay. So you flip the script on me. Good point. Why tell people? Why? That's really smart. If Allah is the one who is going to help me through it, and he's the one I rely upon, and other people, maybe I can share them to feel better, but he's the one who's going to test me. Why do I need to tell them? It's for God. Did you ever hear about Abdullah complain? Salman says it's linked to contentment. Yeah. If I'm content with even my suffering, then I don't see it as a problem anymore. I see it as a chance Allah asked of me to show him what I'm made of. Now, why will I complain about that? Say it, Hashim, did you unmute for a second, or was that a mistake?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's just an example or something that came up to my mind when you mentioned it. Imagine falling into a problem. You have a few friends, for example, that you speak to, or members of the family that you mention problems that you will fall into. So you are now in the middle of, I guess, an ailment.
Yeah.
And you spoke to the first one, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes. You spoke to the second one, a third one. You obviously need water after all these talks. And then you are already tired, so you slept. Somehow, the point that Sister Kauthar mentioned is obviously the point. Sometimes by bringing people in, by really investing your time speaking to people and mentioning it to them, especially if they won't be able to change anything in particular, you lose your focus from who you should seek help and recognition from. And that's, I think, my point.
Very beautiful. Very beautiful. Brother Salman?
So just a quick question. He mentioned he didn't speak about his ailment until it had gone by. So why would you speak about your ailment afterwards? Would it be to like help people, to make them think like, oh, you can get through this, or what's the link there?
Yeah, so definitely
As it mentions,
for a reason, right? For a
mentioned it
purpose.
sorry, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So not just for the sake of complaining, for some lesson, like Allah helped me through this, but I went. It's also good to talk to each other and say what we're going through. It's very healthy to share our struggles. Not all of them. Some of them are just for Allah, but sharing what we've gone through. Definitely not to withhold from someone what can benefit them and help them. So that's one answer why you'd share it. Also to show a vulnerability to someone, to get to know you a little bit more. That's fine to admit mistakes we've done, but it's when you admit them. It's for some reason it's after you've got through it. And actually, Kauthar, you've answered it. It's because Allah is the one who's going to help me through it. So why do I need to ask others for help? I can help them with Allah's advice to me later. But let me shift or reorient my priority. I have an issue, I first go to Allah. From my dialogue with Allah, I then learn how to deal with this problem, how to hold this problem, with whom do I share it, how do I make a lesson from it, how do I move on from this, how do I heal my past. But I need that priority, right? Wasi, did you unmute to speak, or was just anything you wanted to add there, brother? That's fine if not, if it's a mistake. Okay, I that's what I think the conclusion is. And the main conclusion of the Imam is, when you read this saying, the Imam says, that's fine, Wasi, it's better, fa'alam, know this, it's such an important point. أن أخذ القليل خير من ترك الكثير. I love this. I'd rather, Imam is saying, it's better to take a little bit from this than leave the whole thing away. So if you're reading this thing, I'm not like this, or it's just so much for me, or there's so many advice, like I get it, it's good, but I'm not like that. It's like, no, Mum's saying, don't think like that. Think, okay, there's one thing I can take from it. He says, I'd rather you take one thing than leave the whole thing away. And this is my advice to all of you for, in general, reading Nahjal Balagha. Sometimes the Imam speaks at great length about the great beauty of his companions, and I'm not Abu Dhar, I'm not Uthman al-Mas'un, I'm not these guys. Next week, when we look at other companions, I'm not them. But if I can take just one thing from them, especially while we have this space of Nahjal Balagha, would not be a beautiful thing for me to do, even if it's a little. So Sister Kauthar has ended by saying about strength. Once you've gone through it, you can show people how beautiful it is to show that you are dealing with it in silence, and show your strength and iman, and give proof you can get through it. I agree. If I can get through it, you can get through it. You can get through it, I can get through it. We're here to help each other on this journey. I agree, sister. And to help each other for next week, because I really have to go for work now, we are looking at sermon 182. It's a long sermon, but at the end of it is where we're looking at friendship. And I hope tomorrow we can all discuss, and next week we can all discuss, because time for me begins and ends with seeing you. what does it mean to be a good friend, and how does working on your heart make you a better friend to another person? So inshallah, for next week, sermon 182. Thank you so much for your amazing points. I always benefit, and I will see you here next week, inshallah. Sermon 182 of Nahjal Balagha, in being a good friend. Allah, that's it. Take care, everyone, inshallah. Thank you for your amazing reflections. Ma'asalam, ahsantum.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good luck with everyone on your journeys, inshallah. Remember in your dua.
علي ولي الله علي ولي الله علي ولي الله